Welcome, everyone. Good to see you here this morning. For this PSI in practice on spiritual self-care, which involves two of my favorite topics, spirituality and self-care. There are also topics, I think, that are generating increasing interest among people. So I'm glad to be part of the larger conversation. And I'm glad to have you all here participating in the larger conversation as well. There is some conceptual material here that I'm just going to breeze through. It'll be like a high-speed tour. As a starting point, we don't need to get too philosophical on this. What exactly is self-care? Hi, welcome. It is not a singular entity. It's not a distinct thing. It is a multiplicity of strategies, practices, and commitments. It also, let's say, effective self-care, depends upon the smallest self and the biggest self. So where we are vocationally, where we are personally, where we are in our lifespan, what we understand to be successful self-care is going to evolve as our life and situation evolves. So this is going to be sort of a scattershot overview of that. Why practice self-care ourselves? A lot of you are working with really challenging populations. Some of you are working in hospice or terminal settings where the outcome is already established and foreordained, and there's a real process of reconciliation that goes on around that. Especially in trauma work, someone mentioned, I think there's greater and greater appreciation of the need for people to tap into spiritual and religious resources when working with trauma survivors. I think there needs to be a concomitant understanding that the practitioners themselves need to actively be encouraged to tap into those religious and spiritual resources, especially when dealing with trauma survivors, grief and loss. So I get a little uncomfortable talking about self-care as something we can do so we can better serve others, because that feels like too instrumental to me and sort of a missing of the foundational point, which is that it's good we are all here. It's good that we all are. And my concern about talking about self-care as bullet points, like how are you doing on 12 out of 12, is that it's more busyness and doing and less being and receiving. And I think a large part of spiritual self-care is being in a more receptive, accepting space. So that said, there is positive modeling. Like if we're taking care of ourselves, our families are likely to notice, our friends are likely to notice, our clients are likely to notice, and hopefully that will inspire them to do the same. So there is the benefit of positive modeling. Also, I think the value of good stewardship, that we are stewards of our gifts and talents. Burnout is a very real risk, and it is. I'm trying to think of a word that is not this, but I'm going to use it anyway. It is in many cases fatal. I mean, it is terminal. It ends careers. So people, when they start kind of flirting with burnout, I think are definitely playing with fire. You don't really come back from burnout. So it's something that we need to take seriously, that we need to understand as a kind of imperative. The idea of ongoing self-care as making our activity both sustainable, sustained, and sustaining, I think is really significant. We really want to hit the trifecta there. It's also part of intentional living, setting the intention about how we want to be in the world, who we want to be in the world. And I think for some people who are more comfortable with religious language, there's a sense of sacred obligation and duty around it. This is a quote from Jack Kornfield, who's a Buddhist teacher. And he says, if your compassion does not include yourself, it is incomplete. But I think this notion of incomplete compassion really serves as a caution to us. It doesn't make sense to talk about compassion, asterisk excluding myself. When is self-care spiritual? As Kathleen mentions, I was in a dual degree program, one at the School of Social Work and one at the Divinity School. And And the School of Social Work did not offer a single self-care class. And in fact, when we got our convocation, we had a speaker who talked about how the process of going through the social work program was going to make us more selfless, more giving, and there's more. And it was convocation, classes hadn't even started, and I was already exhausted. And I already had this tremendous sense of inadequacy. And I also thought, does she not understand who comes to social work school? So getting back to when is self-care appropriate, we really need to correct for our own problems and not for other people's problems. We have a tendency to correct for other people's problems in our own lives. The exposure that I got to in Divinity School was a 1-credit supplemental class that you could take on top of everything you did otherwise, in terms of your academic burden. And I remember my advisor saying, I don't want the self-care class to be the thing that pushes you over the edge. And what that underscores for me is the necessity for all of us to treat this as integral. It should pervade the curriculum of our schools. It should pervade the curriculum of our agencies. It should pervade the curriculum of our counseling centers. It's an ongoing educational process. These are skill sets that we will develop over time if we are going to be taking it seriously. So Stephen Covey is an organizational psychologist who wrote a number of bestsellers, including The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. So he talks about really there being these quadrants of renewal, these processes of renewal. Physical, mental, social, emotional, and spiritual. So physical, we get a lot of messages about making sure we get adequate sleep, making sure we have nutritious meals, making sure we have time for rest and renewal. And those are important messages. Mental, that we don't push ourselves beyond our limits, that we're not sort of mentally fogged, that we take time to learn, that we use our mind in novel and expansive ways. Social and emotional is really about kind of us in our relational contexts and how we feel in relation to ourselves and the world. And then spiritual, which I put an asterisk because I feel like sometimes spiritual self-care gets treated as the not otherwise specified of self-care, right? Anything that's not physical, mental, emotional, or spiritual, or social or emotional is probably spiritual. So it's kind of like this catch-all basket for things that we are not doing elsewhere or otherwise. I think we can have a probably fuller understanding of that. The one thing that I do want to just emphasize here is that spiritual care is not a contradiction in terms. I think in, unfortunately, a lot of faith communities still, and in a lot of settings or organizations that are exceedingly mission-driven, the idea is that if you were sufficiently spiritual, you would not have any sense of self, and therefore you would not have any obligation to practice self-care because you would be so totally in service to the cause that your needs would somehow magically dissipate. That is, I'm going to use religious language here, that's false witness. That's absolutely untrue. And the book of Leviticus tells us in the Hebrew scriptures, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. One minister I used to work with said, this is actually a command that people do follow, and they love their neighbor every bit as badly as they love themselves. So really understanding the full mutuality of that, of loving our neighbors as ourselves, as a divine commandment, I think will help us to take it more seriously. So the holistic model of spirituality in Kanda and Furman, the understanding that Kanda and Furman have is that spirituality is both at the center of the person and also the totality and wholeness of the person. And that the spiritual domain is really what connects the center of the person with the totality and wholeness of the person. And the wholeness of the person puts us in relation to others and to the larger world. I like that kind of dual attention of center, wholeness, because I think it gives us a wider perspective.